So we're in the home stretch now. Everything is working, except we actually need this stuff to represent actual items that the player has picked up. So more or less, we need to delete all this stuff. We don't want them to start with anything, unless you did want the player to start with anything. Then you could add that right off the bat. But you'd need to be careful that you add it to the actual inventory list as well as to the menu. Um, but anyway, we'll assume you don't want to do that. If you did, I'll mention something about it a little bit later. But anyway, so we're going to have to delete all these and then add specific ones when the player picks them up. So that'll be our next step here. So I think I'm going to close this project settings. I believe we actually are going to want to make a new script for this. And, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess. I've actually overlooked a piece of this that we need to do first. And that is we need to make this exit button work. So right now I have my own button on my keyboard I'm pressing to bring up and dismiss the menu. If we're gonna have this here, we need to make it do a thing. I actually just discovered an interesting bug also. Even though my player is disabled, I'm technically interacting with this door behind the menu when I click that button. So we need to maybe think about that too. I'll make a note of that. Alright, so to get the button to work, I'm going to go back to my inventory menu script. And I'm going to make a public function. I generally try to put the public functions somewhere after. So we got our serialized fields and our fields up at the top, our properties. Now, before I get into the private methods, I'm going to make my public method. And this one is going to be a public void, and I'm going to call it exit menu button clicked. And this thing needs to be public because we're going to use it in the Unity editor here, and the only ones that show up will be public methods. So real quick before we do that, we need to say what this button's actually going to do. I think all it needs to do is call hide menu, right? When you click that exit menu button, we just want to hide the menu, I think. Maybe I'm overlooking something, but we will catch it later, I imagine. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to the Unity editor. I'm going to go to the scene window here and double click my menu and go to 2D mode and select this button. And I'm going to look in the on click area of the button. So you can see here's the exit menu button. I'm going to click this plus and I'm going to add an object here. So I need to add the object that contains the script, that contains the method I want to call when the player clicks this button. And that method is on the inventory menu script, which is on the inventory menu canvas game object. So that's what I dragged in here. And now because I made that function public, if I go over the inventory menu script here, I should be able to find my exit menu button clicked function, and now it's all hooked up. And if I run the game, when the player clicks that button, it should call that that method. So let's just test it. Seems like it's working to me. Cool. All right. I keep thinking of more things we ought to do, and I think we should probably play a sound effect when the player opens this menu. I'm going to use the exact same sound effect that gets played when we add something to the inventory You may want to make a custom sound effect. That's up to you. So I'm going to find my inventory menu canvas here. I'm going to, I guess I'm just going to, over here in the inspector, I'm going to go ahead and add an audio source. And for the clip, I'm going to plug in, let's see what I got already. I've got this bag sound. Let me just remember what it sounds like. Remember, it's pretty quiet. Yeah. So that's kind of like, okay, the player's opening up this bag. That works. It's kind of like the same thing in World of Warcraft, or I don't know, I'm sure it's in lots of games. Anyway, let's plug this clip into the new audio source we just made. So I'm going to drag that bag sound in there. I'm going to uncheck play on awake. I'm going to leave the volume cranked up because this is kind of a quiet sound effect. And now I need to go back to my script. I need to add on the inventory menu script, I need to add a private audio source. I'm going to call it audio source with a lowercase a. And then I need to initialize this variable inside of awake, just like where we are doing all of the other initialization here. So down at the bottom, I will say audio source equals get component audio source. And let's see, when you show the menu, we can play that audio source. So we'll just say audio source dot play. And I actually think we should do the same thing when you hide the menu. So audio source dot play. Just like so. I'm going to save that and test it. Just another layer of feedback and polish. It's good to have this stuff. So one issue I noticed is it played the sound as soon as the game started because I am hiding the menu as soon as the game starts. So that's an interesting, this works, but that the initial hide menu, right, that's getting called in start, that's kind of problematic because I don't necessarily want that sound to play right off the bat. We're getting to the point where I'm going to have to write a little bit of custom code to make this work. So I'm just going to do something like this. I'm going to say audio source dot volume equals 0. I'm going to hide the menu, and then I'm going to say audio source dot volume equals 1. Let's just say one day I didn't want this to be 1. Like I changed the sound effect and it's really loud. So it's kind of bad to hard code 1 here because it's just going to overwrite like whatever someone thought they're intentionally picking here. Now, granted, I do have 1 selected now, but let's just say I was like, you know what, 1's not quite right. It should be 9.2. So watch what happens. Well, I didn't save it. Let me go save. Back in my script, save this sucker, go back over here, run the game, and it should not play the sound effect, which it still did, but I see the volume went to 1. I'm confused about why it played the sound effect when the volume was 0. So in order to debug this, I'm going to verify, well, what I did to verify it was what happens if I comment this line out and save it, and we're going to see if we hear the sound effect. I would assume we will not because we're setting the volume to 0 and we're never changing it. And sure enough, I did not hear the sound effect. So the problem here, I believe, is that we're changing the volume back to 1, before the sound has finished playing, and I suppose we need to wait for it to finish playing before we turn this back on. So I really didn't intend on showing this right now, but I did want to show it at some point, so why not now, I suppose. This menu series is really kind of getting long, but that's okay. It's all useful stuff to learn. So the issue is we can't do this. Remember that our code executes like very sequentially. So it runs this line, then it runs this line, then it runs this line, then it's done. So the problem is it is running this line before the sound effect is finished playing. And remember, the sound effect's getting called from right here in this hide menu. If I hit back, take me back to where I was. If I hit F12, it'll take me to the definition, back. Anyway, I need a way to not execute this code until this sound effect is finished. And there's an interesting way to do that. So when you want to have code like wait for something, or if you want to have timers or run code that kind of executes in parallel with this normal sequence that is going to execute linearly, that is when you use something called a coroutine in Unity, at least. So coroutines are super useful. The syntax for it, basically I'll add this to the notes, coroutines, and you can look it up and see more info. So if you want to see the full nitty-gritty, I encourage you to watch this video. I will add it to our notes. But in the meantime, I will just step through real quickly how to set one up. So first we need to make a new method, and it's going to be of the type, well, it's going to have the return type IEnumerator. So whatever, I'll just put it right here. So private IEnumerator. You have to be really careful because there's a thing called an IEnumerable. You see here, that is not the right one. You need to use IEnumerator. It's just the specific syntax you need for coroutines. And I'm going to call it wait for sound clip or audio clip. Is that what it's called? Okay, and so this is my method, but the problem is it says, well, wait a minute. You have specified that this method has the return type IEnumerator, but you're not returning anything just yet. Alright, so at some point we need to make sure we return something of the type IEnumerator, whatever that is, right? So we'll do that. The neat thing in coroutines is you can wait for an amount of time. So you may, in your coding with Unity experience, maybe you've tried to have a while loop at some point. In Visual Studio, if you type while and then hit tab twice, you get this code snippet that fills in the basic format of a while loop. Anyway, while loops, you can't use a while loop in the regular flow of your Unity code, and the reason is the while loop will sort of, remember, the code is executing sequentially. So if I were to put a while loop here, it will never get done with this method until whatever condition is in this while loop is satisfied. And so the problem is, in games, all of your other game objects out there will stop updating. In other words, update, and not just this script, but every script will not get called until this while loop is done. And so you can't use while loops in your normal Unity code flow because they will literally freeze your game. If you were to run, if I ran this right now, it would freeze my game and I'd have to go to the task manager and close Unity that way, and I'd lose all my unsaved progress, which is really a good reminder to save your stuff. So save it. Anyway, don't do this. Never have a while loop in your code unless you are putting it inside an IEnumerator that will be, ran as a coroutine in Unity. The reason this will work is because coroutines run in parallel, so my coroutine is not going to hold up the rest of my game. It sort of starts its own sequence that happens out in its own world. And so it can actually go at the same time as my regular game's execution without freezing everything up. So what I can do is I could put a while loop here and it would work, but the other cool thing I can do is I can just straight up wait for an amount of time. So the syntax for this would be yield return new wait for seconds, and then you could pass some amount of seconds, like 2 or something, right? This would be a magic number 2, and I'm not going to use it for real. I'm just giving you an example. So yield here is the sort of magic bit that makes our IEnumerator, when ran as a coroutine, not freeze our entire game while it's waiting for 2 seconds. This will wait for 2 seconds, so I can do something like this. Debug.log start waiting, and then right after my 2-second timer here, I can say debug.log done waiting. Let's just do that. Okay, this is a pretty good example. Now so this is our coroutine. I have to start this coroutine at some point. So I'm just going to call it in start here just to make it easy. So inside of my start, I'm going to say start coroutine, and then you just pass in the name of the method. So this one, wait for audio clip, just like so. You have to pass in whatever parameters it takes, in this case none. Alright, so this is how you start a coroutine. If you were to just call wait for audio clip like that, it won't work right. You have to say start coroutine, wait for audio clip. Anyway, we're not really waiting for an audio clip just yet. We're just demonstrating that you can wait for 2 seconds. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run the game, and I would expect it to immediately print to the console something about start waiting, and then 2 seconds will go by and the console will show me done waiting. So let's try that out. So we started waiting, and in theory 2 seconds later it printed done waiting. So that is how you do real easy timers with coroutines. Now in this case I mentioned that 2 here was a magic number, and I don't just want to kind of like arbitrarily wait 2 seconds. I want to wait for my audio clip to be done. So I think I can do that by saying audio source dot clip dot length, and so I can wait for the entire length of this clip, and then so let's kind of move this code around. I'm going to set the volume to 0, and then I'm going to wait for the length of the clip, and finally I'm going to set the volume back to 1 for now at least, and this will fix our bug. I want to point out a couple things. First of all, I can't, like, if I put code here, debug.log this we're not done waiting is what this is going to say. And the point of this is to demonstrate, even though I have this line right here that says wait for audio clip, we're starting that coroutine. Remember, the coroutine is like its own thread, its own sequence that's going to be executed linearly, where we're waiting for this amount of time or whatever. It does not, it runs in parallel with our game's main thread. It does not stop the game's main thread, which means that this line of code is not waiting for this coroutine. This stuff below the part that says yield return new wait for seconds, this right here is waiting for this part to finish, but this will print right after this is done. So it'll say start waiting, it'll print we're not done waiting, and then 2 seconds later it'll say done waiting. So just really quickly I'll show you that. I understand that that's kind of confusing and kind of rushing through the explanation, so sorry if it doesn't make a lot of sense. You can see in the console it printed we're not done waiting like instantly, and then 2 seconds later it says done waiting. So I'll just do that one more time. And I don't know if you also noticed, but our sound effect no longer played right at the beginning. So we fixed the bug. There is a new bug. Remember I said, if let's say it was really important to me that this volume was like set at this specific number here, and the designer really liked that, and then they run the game, and guess what's going to happen? After 2 seconds you'll see that value goes to 1, and so I just lost my fancy value. I hear the sound effect now, but I lost my fancy value that I had fine-tuned and really loved. So we kind of have to do this a little bit more intricately. So basically before I set the volume to 0, I need to make a local variable to sort of remember the original value. So I'll say something like float original volume equals audio source dot volume. Then I'll set it to 0, and then rather than putting it back to 1, which is a bit of a magic number, it's just like, why 1? I don't know. I should set it back to the original volume, which is not a magic number. It's a named variable that I understand because it has a clear name. Okay, so I'm going to leave all these debugs in just to kind of help give you an example of the flow of the coroutine here. But I want to also, coroutines, they're useful for all kinds of stuff. Like a good, for instance, would be if you wanted a cooldown for like a gun. Like you don't want to be able to shoot as fast as the player can possibly press the shoot button. You could create a cooldown, and that cooldown would be a enumerator that's used as a coroutine, and it will say wait for the cooldown. Once its cooldown's up, we are allowed to shoot again. So you'd have like a bool, like can shoot, you'd set it to false, wait for the cooldown, and then set it back to true. So that's an easy example. Another one that's really useful is using coroutines for like a loading screen. So maybe I'll show you an example of that in a later video. Anyway, I can't emphasize it enough. Coroutines, really good for timers, really good for sequences where like I don't want this next thing to happen until the previous thing is done, which is what we're doing here. I don't want this volume to be set until this audio clip has finished playing. So it's a very roundabout way to get our sound functionality to work the way we wanted, but it is working now. I just got rid of that extra white space. We don't want extra white space where we don't need it. I'm going to save it, and I think now we can finally get back to what I was going to do originally, which was start working on the functionalities so that so that when you bring up the menu, it's only going to show one of these for each inventory item that you've collected. And the particular ones it shows will like print text in here and have an icon based on the inventory objects you've actually clicked on and that you've picked up.